welcome everyone. Good evening. I'm Leslie Torres Rodriguez. I'm the acting superintendent, and I want to welcome everyone here to our community budget session. And before I review the objectives, the overarching objective for tonight was really to engage our community. And we have representatives from our central office, school-based staff, and community members as well. And we wanted to really give an opportunity to identify what is it that drives, impacts, and threatens our budget and how stable the budget can be. To examine our need to change how we distribute and how we use our resources in the best interest of our students. And to identify what we're calling key priorities, those essential ingredients in service of equity, in service of making sure that all of our students have every opportunity that they deserve in every one of our schools. And lastly, to embrace our collective responsibility in this process. We believe that given an opportunity to engage our community at all levels of the process is what's going to make this budget and drive the budget. And so that's the opportunity that we have here tonight. So Paula, our Chief Financial Officer, is going to guide us through the information, and we hope to have an opportunity at the end to engage in dialogue, whether it be answering some of your questions, but also to really engage in a learner opportunity so that you can give us an understanding of what it is that you think we have to consider as we develop our process, always in relation to our equity objectives and what it is that our students need to thrive and be successful. So I thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Paula.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to just start with a general overview of our budget for some introductory information. So people often ask what funds are included in the education budget. So we have two types of funds that make up our total education budget. We have our general fund, which finances our core operation and day-to-day operations of our school district. And the general budget is just about $283 million and represents 66% of our overall budget. We also get a number of special funds. Those are grants that we receive. And grants are largely supplemental in nature. They lay on top of the general budget and the day-to-day operations. And they're usually determined, the restrictions on the grants, by the provisions or the legislative directives that have created them. Our grant budget is just about $146 million and make up 34% of our overall operating budget. So when you take a look at where specifically our funding comes from, we have about 44% of our funding, or $188 million, comes from the state of Connecticut through pass-through grants. And this would be grants such as the education cost-sharing grant. We also receive about $110 million, or about 26% of our funding through state grants. About $95 million, or 22% of our budget, comes from the city of Hartford through the local tax collection. We also, as an educational organization, get about $29 million from the federal government, or just about 7% of our budget. And we also receive contributions and donations from private organizations or business communities of about $6.7 million, or just under 2% of our overall budget. Now, when you look at our overall budget, the general fund, again, represents the core of the funding that we have received, and the general fund has been largely flat. For the last 7 years, despite increasing costs, our general fund budget has remained flat, and actually over the last 2 years has actually decreased by $1.75 million, or 0.6%. We also are starting to see some of our special funds grants go away. They're given for specific periods, and over the last year we've seen about $13.5 million of our special funds grants lapsing or eroding, about 9% decrease in our overall revenue supporting our schools. You know, when we talk about special funds, a lot of Comments that we hear are, well, even though the general fund has gone down, some of your grants have gone up. So when we talk about, again, special funds, the thing to keep in mind is not all education aid is created equal. If you look over our largest 10 grants, they represent 90% of our overall special funds budget, and they're largely targeted to certain groups. And you're going to see the largest portion of that, or just about 60% of that, is targeted for magnet suburban students that come in from other districts into our host magnet programs. We also have grants such as Title I, which is targeted for based on income of students, and Alliance District funds that are for bold and innovative reforms to really close the achievement gap. So again, most of these are supplemental. They lay on top of the core and don't support the core. You know, when you look at where our funding goes, if you look at our expenditures, we have a what and a why of our expenditures. And the first slide looks at our spending by our why. So if you look at it, about 81% of our spending is on schools and students. You know, that is anywhere from instruction to student support services such as language, social work services, guidance services, school administration, and then professional development and improvement of instruction services represents that 81%, or just about $342 million of our overall budget. The rest of the three buckets here, operation of building and maintenance represents $33.2 million, or 7.8% of our overall spend. We also have student transportation, about 5% of our overall spend, or about little over $22 million. And then the rest, $27 million, or just over 6%, goes to general administration of the school district. And if you look specifically as to the what of our funding, you're going to see that almost 70% of our funding is tied up in salaries and benefits for the staff that we employ throughout the district and throughout our schools. Student tuition, that is money that we send out of the district for students that attend out-of-district opportunities, whether it be through open choice or through inter-district magnet schools, represents $65.3 million, or about 15% of our overall spend. And student transportation, again, makes up 21.2 or 5% of our budget. So you can see just from those three areas right there, that's just about 90% of our overall spend. And then the rest of the categories, we have about $16 million, or about 4% in building maintenance, utilities, and improvements to our facilities. About $13.5 million, or just about 3%, in services, which include professional contracts and services and IT services. Supplies and materials, just about $11 million, or about 3% of our budget, and then all other miscellaneous expenditures make up the remaining $6 million, or 1.4, and these would be things like advertisement, communications, postage, and other areas. So when we talk about what is our budget context and reality moving forward, our budget context really is focused on three areas, and that is our challenge is our sustainability. We have increasing costs again this year and decreasing funds projected moving forward. We also know that our need for change in search of equity and excellence, that our current system's working for some, we know it needs to work for all of our students and all of our schools. And then we need to make sure that our resources are aligned with our highest priorities, which is students first, and make sure that we're identifying those essential ingredients that every student needs in order to be successful. So the first of our challenge is our sustainability. And as you're going to see, we have forecasted increases of approximately $14 million moving into this budget, and we're going to look at those in a few moments. We also have developed revenue scenarios pre-governor budget, pre-city budgets, and if we follow our likely scenario, we might see revenue decreases of about $6 million. With both of those, that would leave us a gap to close of just under $20 million, which is significant for the district. And then we have continued threats to our stability, namely the city, the state, and implications for our schools and our students through SHIF. So if we look at the forecasted drivers, the largest of the drivers is our tuition expense. We've seen this tuition line increase by over 455% over the last 8 years, and it's been a significant driver to our cost. If everything that happened this current year with, we lost about 360 students to interdistrict opportunities and open choice opportunities. We also had increased in special education costs of anywhere from 10 to 20% given the facilities. If that continues, we'll see increased tuition of $6 million projected for next year. Our second largest drivers is, remember, I said that about 70% of our budget is tied up in salaries and fringe. Our fringe benefits do rise every year based on our medical trends and our insurances that we have. We expect that cost to increase about $5.2 million for next year. Salaries is our third driver, about $1.4 million expected to move forward into the next year. We also have CPI increases, which are contractual increases built into a lot of our contracts, and we have a transportation contract for transporting students. That cost will go up by $638,000. Rental of facilities, we also have contractual increases built into the facility contracts that we have. So about $240,000 in increased costs associated with the facilities that we lease. And then utilities is a big driver as well, based on our historical consumption and just the increases from utility companies. We're projecting about $430,000 in cost increase moving into next year. So you're going to see that rounds up the $14 million. And let me just add, these are before any mitigation efforts are attempted. You know, we are working through a number of these to try to see what costs that we can contain, what vendors we can negotiate with to see if we can retain some of these costs and even reduce them to try and mitigate our cost increases. And again, the revenue assumptions are also a tricky move. I'm sure many of you might have been following all along in the paper as to what's happening with education funding across Connecticut. And pre the governor's budget, which should be out tomorrow, we made a few assumptions on revenue and what if scenarios and what would the impact be on those what if scenarios on our overall budget. So if we look at our best case scenario in this case, which would be an 8.4% revenue increase, largely driven by, you know, could we charge revenue for students coming in to our host magnet programs? That would require legislative change for us in order to do that, which is a very big lift, but what would that look like? So even with increased revenue and increased costs, we still would have about a $6 million gap to close in that best case scenario. Under our worst case scenario, if we see further erosion in ECS funding or in grant rescissions or even in city funding, this worst case scenario is $21.3 million less in revenue. Again, with our increasing cost, you can see the gap is insurmountable, about $36 million. And under our most likely case scenario, what we think is we're probably going to have a little of both, right? So if the city can maintain funding where it is, if we see limited grant rescissions, and we see limited or flat funding in our education cost sharing grant from the state, that would leave us about $5.6 million less in revenue. Again, with the cost increases, gives us that gap of just under $20 million or $19.5 million. So tomorrow is going to be a very important day for us when the governor releases his budget and we can see exactly what the impact might be on us moving forward. So those major threats to the stability, some I've already talked about. The state of Connecticut is under a fiscal crisis, projected a $1.4 billion gap. So we, as a Hartford Public Schools, are a fiscally dependent organization. And what that means is we don't have the power to derive income through taxation. We rely on our funding through state, federal government, and city resources. So when you talk about Hartford, 70% of our operating budget is supported by the state of Connecticut. What happens there impacts us tremendously. The city of Hartford's fiscal crisis, well, many of you have heard Mayor Bronin speak about what the city of Hartford's facing. They're currently running a $23 million gap for this current year. They're projected a $50 million gap for next year and escalating beyond there. The city of Hartford supports about 23% of our operating budget. What happens in the city of Hartford could have a very direct impact on what happens to our schools. And the last one is chef implications. So as more students leave our schools for opportunities through chef, interdistrict opportunities, or open choice, or even are outplaced through special education, that has an impact on us. So we're not saying here that expanded choice options are not a good thing for our families or our students. Opportunities are there, but understand that there is a consequence for that. That means there's less students in our schools. We still need to sustain our schools and the students that are in those schools. We also are charged tuition for some of those opportunities that students do take. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen a 455% increase. Also, as the Nexus District, if those students do receive services in those schools, we are responsible for paying those services as well, whether they're receiving special education services or related services, we pay for that. You know, and some people have said, okay, well, just don't pay the tuition. Okay, well, unfortunately, that is not an option for us because in legislation, it's built in to allow the Commissioner of Education to deduct the funds directly from us if we fail to pay any of those operators for those funds. And why do we talk about the need to change? So equity and excellence is what we need. We need quality education for every single one of our students. We know our current system works for some, it needs to work for all. We know we have scarce resources that are spread too thin, and we're going to need to have to address that. We have characteristics that are unique to Hartford that are costly, such as our aging facilities, our small schools, and some of our unique school models drive some costs. We also have sustainability within our fiscal and budget models that we need to review. You know, as we're looking at SBB and weighted student funding that sends a lot of the revenue out to schools, well, we know that those models were created not for schools under 400. They were created when the schools were supposed to be like-sized. So we have a sustainability problem within our current fiscal models. And I would say beyond that is not only do we have a sustainability problem within our current fiscal models, but we have a sustainability problem across education funding in this entire state. We know the formulas are broken, and it's about time they get fixed. How are we going to ensure our students, not only in our schools, equitable funding, but to make sure that we get equitable funding from the state of Connecticut and from the city of Hartford? We shouldn't have to beg for opportunities for our students. That should be their constitutional right. And what is our guiding priorities for decision making? We need to make sure our guiding priorities are focused on equity and quality. How are we using our resources? And we need to make sure that our resources are aligned to fund the highest priorities first. And well, how are we going to do that? Well, the budget priorities. You want to go through them, Dr. Torres?
So certainly students first, they're at the core of what we do. But in terms of our priorities, we know that we have 8 equity indicators. Those are the stakes that we're putting on the ground, if you will, that we're saying, if we do these, if we achieve these 8 things, we're saying that that's how we are going to get to equity and excellence for all of our students. What we have done in terms of identifying our priorities is to really focus in on 2. One is literacy and numeracy. So still making sure that all of our students reach their reading proficiency in the 3rd grade, and then making sure that we're equipping our students to be successful in their Algebra 1 class by 9th grade. So we're going to remain focused on those 2 academic priorities. The other one is that building capacity through data teams and a commitment to systemic continuous improvement. So capacity building is really investing in our adults. We believe that if we equip our teachers and our leaders with the knowledge and the skills necessary, they will transform how our students learn. So we are committing to doing that for our staff. And then also through data teams. Data teams is a structure. It is a way in which we can structure how the adults interact with each other and how they explore their practice. And we're making sure that we do that at the school level, but also holding ourselves accountable at central office as well. Making sure that we step back, analyze how we're doing our work in alignment with those equity indicators that we had identified, and then asking ourselves, are we really improving how we're saying we're going to do the work? That's what continuous improvement really is being able to step back and saying, okay, this is what we say we were going to do, this is why, and are we doing it how we said we were going to do it? If we're not, how is it that we have to change our practice? And being able to create a structure in which the adults are asking each other those questions. Social and emotional supports, still being committed to our students and where they come from. We know that many of our students have many needs, and we want to make sure that they encounter schools, classrooms, interactions with every single adult that is caring and supportive. So yes, making sure that we meet their needs academically, but making sure also that we commit to their emotional growth. And lastly, our family and community partnerships, and making sure that those remain focused on our dual capacity framework. When we come together to engage with our community and our families, we want to come as learners. We want to be informed by our families and by our community partners as to how they can really help us do the work better, and how we can help them help our families and our students do it better as well. And so every time we come together, our goal through this budget process, this is an example of trying to engage our community, but also hearing from you and from our community, how is it that we're going to do it together? And that entails this dual capacity perspective, making sure that we both enter as learners in this process. So we've engaged with all of our SGCs, all of our PTA presidents, PTO presidents, and our principals in a similar session in which we talked about the ingredients for success. And so in addition to sharing what our priorities were, which evolved from our equity indicators, we've asked each and every school to identify what they believe their ingredients are in relation to the priorities. And so that's one of the questions that we have later on today for this group here is, what your thoughts are around those essential ingredients, and what is it that we need to be considering that we may not have considered yet. So that's the conversation that we hope to engage toward the end of the presentation tonight. Thank you. All right, to the 2017-18 budget process, well, the goal of our process remains the same, is
The goal of budgeting is to find the best possible alignment of resources to ensure student success. We had a slight modification to the budget process, and the budget process will be focused on identifying those essential ingredients. So we have been engaging with schools, the principals, and the school governance councils, as Dr. Torres mentioned. And schools are developing their budgets based on a student-focused, need-based approach. So they don't have revenue. We're saying, what are those needs that you need? What are those essential ingredients that you feel are essential that your students need? And we're making sure we capture that in the preliminary budgets that are being submitted by schools. You know, and schools are doing this by identifying the needs through a focus on the student success plans, a focus on the school improvement plans. You know, how do those align to the district strategic operating plan and the goals, as Dr. Torres identified, the priorities of the budget process. And we're expecting the spending and the resources around those identified needs that are coming out of schools. And again, this process includes expanded engagement opportunities. You know, we are in this together and we want to hear from you as to how, as Dr. Torres mentioned, what are their opportunities? Are there anything that we have missed in this? So we would like to hear from you. And I know this is very small, but you have this in your packet, but there are some expanded engagement opportunities that we have coming up. So we have tonight's process, and we also have another community session scheduled for the 15th, I believe, and also the 21st. So we will be at March 1st, I'm sorry. One at Buckley High School and one at JMA. That will be coming up. We expect that the budget, the superintendent's draft budget, will be presented to the Board of Education on April 18th. And we'll have the SGCs also be weighing in through a peer support process, which will be coming up from February 21st to March 6th and the superintendent's release to the Board of Education. This budget will conclude with the board adopting a budget, and that will happen by May the 16th. And we'll have a number of sessions with our stakeholders at the city as well during those times, and our legislative leaders as well. And we have more information for you on our website. You can email us any suggestions at budget@hartfordschools.org. And we do have tonight's budget presentation along with some resources available, which you can use and you can look through, and certainly feel free to shoot us any questions. So I thank you for listening, and we'll be happy to hear any questions that you might have, and get your input as well into the process, or opportunities for additional engagement, or certainly opportunities for things that we should consider as we roll out this budget. So thank you. Thank you, sir. So are there any questions that come to mind?
Like kind of like Ernst & Young, so that part is pretty easy to understand. I was talking with Dan Malloy last week, and it concerned me a bit because he was very clear on the fact that there's going to be major budget cuts with regards to education, and that's irrevocable. There's nothing that he believes that he can do to reconsider that, and it's a very substantial amount that's going to disproportionately affect most of the urban centers in Connecticut. And so even with the balance sheet that shows that there's going to be a $20 million deficit, that's very, very substantial. What is the plan going forward with how, or what's going to actually suffer with regards to that particular portion of money that's not going to be there. And then the concerning fact is that every single year there's here was a very high rate of inflation with regards to all of the expenses that they just don't go away. And so with that consideration and a $20 million deficit, what is at least a working plan for the moment of what is going to be lost? Because I mean, if the truth be told, something has to be cut.
So, and that's currently what we're working through right now is, the first thing that we wanted to do is first to start with the need. What are we missing? Because every year we've cut from our current services without regard to what are those essential ingredients that every school is missing in order to get it done. So, our first part of this process is trying to identify what our true need is, because then I think once we have that helps us moving forward into what it is. And then 2 is to develop a plan. We're challenged year after year after year that we're challenged. And there is a need for a long-term solution. So right now we've been having a bunch of short-term solutions where we're going through and we're cutting things, and if you've been following our budget over many years, you're going to see that a lot of the things have been stripped away. We haven't been able to keep up with computer refreshes for some of our schools, our technology needs. You've seen our schools fall into disrepair. So we need to find that long-term solution. And part of that is to recognize is that some of our schools lack the students that we need, right? So we know right-sizing this district, while it will be a very difficult conversation, and we think we need to have great quality schools across this city and every neighborhood in this city, but the reality is that has to be part of our long-term plan, is to how we offer great quality schools in every neighborhood, but again, with an eye on the long-term fiscal problem that we're currently to face. I did see some hope, a little glimmer of hope, however short, in some of what Governor Malloy is recognizing. And I think he's recognizing that the urban centers, even though the state is under a significant crisis, is that the urban centers with the concentration of poverty and the concentration of need additional resources to support those students. That, students should not have to worry about their zip code to be in, to receive a quality education. I don't know, right? So pending his budget coming out tomorrow, is perhaps there will be additional revenue opportunities built in for the urban centers. So that remains to be seen. But again, our solution right now is to find a short-term solution while we work on our long-term plan as to what this district needs moving forward. So I hope that helps answer some of that question. Dr. Torres, you want to add to that?
I just actually wanted to share some of the questions and the themes that were raised at the last time when we met with all of our SGCs, given that we're going to record this and they're not privy to that conversation. But some of the questions were how are special education services determined? That was a question last time. How can community partners help? And there was a question as to our central office staff in relation to one of your pies. I think last time they wanted to go back to one of the slides. Where does central office sit? Was one of the questions that was raised at the last time we were together. Just to be not only transparent, but also to be continuous in terms of the conversations that keep coming up.
Great. Any other questions or just comments, concerns? Yes. Hi. How are you? I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had a quick question about the budget priorities. I think that there are certainly some important ones here, looking at math and ELA, capacity building, social and emotional supports, and the family and community partnerships. I just had a question regarding when we talk about programming for students, considerations for like extracurricular activities, athletics, STEM education, foreign language, internship and career opportunities, and really expanding this to say, like, what would students need to be competitive in today's world beyond what is like the bare minimum that we can provide and feel like we're doing an okay job. So I just kind of wanted to probe of what else are we considering putting in that bucket, and who will be contributing their feedback and input when we talk about parents, students, and community members as to what those priorities become.
So certainly we want our students to be able to compete and thrive in school and when they leave us. When we talked about the priorities, it was in really well considering what those essentials are. We started the process even with our school principals and with our SGCs to identify, and you use the word the bare essentials. That's where we have to start, given where we are in relation to our deficit. Not to say that we're going to ignore, right, all the others and the extracurricular activities and those supports that really sometimes make the entire difference for some of our students, particularly as it relates to our extracurricular activities, our athletics programming. So we have that on the back of our minds, but we have to really engage and enter this process thinking about those essential needs for some of our students. We're not saying we're not going to focus on all of those. You know, Paula talked about the technology and the fact that we have challenges, right, in terms of refurbishing, while saying that we want students to engage in student-centered learning. And so all of those elements require additional supports and services. So we're going to continue to try to be creative, if you will, in terms of the work. But I think that's when we have to step back and think about the partnerships that we have. How is it that we can leverage our community and business partnerships to get at the internships that you're referencing? How is it that we can enlist some of our funders with regard to our technology and their commitment to the student-centered learning? And in terms of even building the capacity of our staff, right, we have several university partners that can really step up, I think, if and willing, and they're willing, and they're just waiting for us to really engage with them. But I think it requires us to just go above and beyond in what we're willing really to do and engage beyond the current circle that we have. So well taken, and certainly not lost in the process. Thank you.
Hi, my name is, good evening, my name is Diane Drake, and I am a community member and an employee of Hartford Public Schools. And I just want to go on record to say that I think that this is a little bit appalling, that this meeting wasn't well advertised. And when you look at this handout that I'm holding before me, you would need 6 magnifying glasses to be able to read it. I did attend the meeting that took place a couple weeks ago at Buckley. And that meeting was required to have an SGC person, a PTO person, along with the principal and other members of the community. I think that our budget is a serious situation, and I believe that all eyes should be on it. So when we talk about transparency, and then we want to circle back to have a conversation to reference a meeting such as this, a meeting where email was sent out today saying it was canceled, and then look and think people in this community don't care. I speak from a vantage point of a counselor, and it bothers me as somebody who works with parents and families that I didn't get something to give me a trigger to remind them. And even if I had looked at this handout, this wouldn't have jumped out to me either. And that email today said the workshop was canceled, but then when it was only when you clicked on the link that you could see that this meeting potentially could still happen. And the only reason I sit in the seat that I am in is because I said, I wonder if there's a meeting, and I live around the corner. So I owe it to Hartford Public Schools, to my parents, to stop and see if this is true. So my issue and concern is in 2016-2017 school year, we have many different ways to communicate. We have email, we have the ability to send voicemail blasts to our parents. If we say they are not present, should be because we have exhausted every avenue to communicate with them that is possible. And today, I can sit in this seat and confidently say that was not done. And that saddens me as both an employee and a resident of this zip code 06112, where we look at closing all of these schools. It does make me feel as if there is a plan, but there's a plan of devastation for this zip code, and it doesn't feel transparent and positive. So I just feel like as a employee, as a board, as a city, we just need to be honest about what we're doing and walk forward to make all parts of Hartford what it should be.
Well, thank you for your feedback on that. So,
I'm Christine. I'm the one that sent out the email today, and I just wanted to clarify and apologize for the confusion. The workshop was canceled, and then I sent out the email to try to clarify, because a lot of people were saying, oh, it's canceled, that there was nothing being held. So I wanted to clarify that although the workshop was canceled, we were still holding this meeting, which did go out to mainly staff. We did send out school messenger notices to all parents, letting them know that this was the first of 3, so hopefully they will be attending the other 2. Again, like you said, and I'll repeat for the camera, February 15th at Buckley High School and March 1st at Hartford High, all at 6 p.m. So again, I apologize for the confusion, but I'll make sure to be extra clear next time I send an email. Thank you.
thank you. So,
But you initially referenced the engagement at the school level?
More parents going to come, because it wasn't until that email that came back through, and I was at the meeting at Buckley. So I just feel like I call a redo. Like, if we want to say that people in this community didn't come out, I feel like we need to give them an opportunity. I don't see a parent from Wishley here, a parent from Waverly. This is walkable. When those other meetings take place, the number one problem that I have is transportation. So if you have a meeting in the area and there's not a sign in a bodega or some sort of something that we've gone above and beyond to make sure that our parents are aware of flyer that I sent home, I just don't feel confidently like I can say that there's full transparency. That's my issue. That's my personal issue.
Right, and so I also am going to ask, we have our community and engagement office as well, and so we'll certainly have a redo, do it again, and in this community. So we don't have a problem with that. The other thing that I want to just make sure that I heard you correctly was in relation to engaging in the process. We want to make sure that you or no one else feels that the engagement is only limited to this. And so making sure that our parents know and our community partners know that the conversations can happen not only in a large setting, but also in intimate settings if it requires that to be so. So at the school level, with us at central office, with our, we have our board finance committee as well. So not limit just to these type of settings. Just wanted to make sure that if you have an opportunity to engage with partners, we will certainly communicate that, but we're open to the conversation in many, many forums. Mr. Stallings, you wanted to? Well, you know what? Because Stan is, we want to make sure that we capture all the comments.
And if everyone should know who I am. My name is Craig Stallings. I'm a board member, chair of finance, member of this community. I totally agree with what you just said, and I have to ultimately take responsibility for this. So thank you, Christina, but I will take responsibility for this as a board, because this is a board responsibility and we should do more. And I will make sure that we engage every member of this community, town committee, NRZ, African American Alliance, and everything in between. I also want to say that we are planning, or I am currently working on a joint session with City Council and the board to talk about this. So we are completely going to put the pedal to the metal in terms of engagement and engaging our community. We're going to hit corners, we're going to hit the 5 corners, we're going to hand out literature, door to door, the whole thing. So there's a whole campaign going on behind this, but I just have to let our staff do their process and go through their process first. But we're going to have a whole grassroots campaign about this budget, because it's serious. We have to look at school consolidation. We have to look at closing or modifying schools, we have to look at everything, and everything's on the table. So I just wanted to say that for the record. Thank you. Sorry. And I don't know who I'm passing this to.
You know, and I'm going to add, to that too, is, these meetings are meant to be pre-engagement meetings, so we can get your feedback just for that. That's been absent in some of the past meetings, so that's what these sessions are designed to do, is make sure that we're out early enough, pre the budget getting developed, to make sure that we solicit feedback from all of our critical partners, parents, families, and all of our stakeholders. So we will certainly do a better job of communication. I want to also let you know for folks that will be in the audience, is we'll have the webinar on the website as well. Stan is taping that for us, so that will be available. And please spread the word. We will have more community sessions, again, to remind everybody, at February 15th at Buckley High School from 6 to 8. So at the end, so let me repeat. February 15th, Buckley High School, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And March 1st, Journalism and Media Academy, Hartford, okay, changing every day, Hartford Public High School. March 1st, Hartford Public High School, 5:30 to 7. And JMA is the board meeting, yes, thank you, thank you. Well, I thank everybody for coming out tonight. And again, feel free, budget at Hartford Schools. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us, and we will do our best to make sure we promptly email you back and with responses. So thank you all.